in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome everybody to the Bob Ross News Station. I am your host, Jorg Washing Machine. Today we will start with some economic news. Our first guest is Mr. Dixon. He's here to talk about the prosperous years of 1964 to 1965. Dick Dixon, you are on the line.
The economic activity coming into 1964 soared to new heights, with the GDP totaling to $585 billion for the year of 1963, which was a gain of $30 billion from the year of 1962. With the GDP on the rise, the unemployment rates stayed relatively the same at an average of 5.5% for both the years of 1962 and 1963. Through the year of 1963, the national debt increased by an total average of 2.6%, and the inflation rate was at an average of 1.32%. The year of 1964 saw a total average 5.8% increase in the GDP compared to the previous year. With the war on poverty started January 8th of that year, unemployment went down an average of 0.5% from the 5.5% standstill in the last 2 years. With the inflation rate at an average of 1% for the year, the national debt only increased by an average of 1.9% that year. A tax cut took into effect, which might have influenced that. In 1965, USA officially went to war in Vietnam, first by bombing raids in February, then the sending of 25,000 troops in April. Also, average unemployment rates are down a whole 1%, going down to 4%, in part to the war on poverty still in effect and the drafting of soldiers being taken into account. Even with the war raging, the GDP is only on the increase, going up a total of 6.5%, and the inflation rate increased by an average of 1.9% from 1965. The national debt increased by an average of 1.8% into the next year. Overall, the years of 1964 and 1965 were of great expansion and growth of the economy, which can be classified as prosperity. This is Dick Dixon signing out.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Dixon. Now I'd like to introduce our next guest talking about the U.S. economy from 1966 to 1967. Uselessness as Kant, you're on the line.
All around me are familiar.
Hello, Mr. Washing Machine. 1967 has been a great year for the U.S. Our unemployment rate is unchanged from the year before at 3.8%, but that's a reasonable number to be at. Though, it has nearly halved since the beginning of the decade, largely due to the war on poverty policy our President Lyndon B. Johnson has enacted. Education and healthcare have soared, which creates jobs because there are roles in those institutions that need to be filled. Coupled with the war in Vietnam seeming to heat up, I see unemployment rate to drop in the future. Additionally, the inflation rate in the U.S. has gone down from 3.5% in 1966 to 3% in 1967. This marks improvement since the rapid increase of inflation in 1964, where it was just 1%. This is the first time inflation rate has dropped in the last 3 years. However, I am unsure it will last. The War on Poverty program is doing well, which results in less government spending into it, which accounts for this year's drop. However, there is escalation in Vietnam with the 1964 offensive, and the Viet Cong numbers rising, and them posing more of a threat. I only see more government money going into the war, which is going to cause inflation rates to rise. But only time will tell. However, the largest change in our economy has been the GDP growth between 1966 and 67. Here, we have a graph showing the GDP growth rates per quarter for the years 1966 and 67. The annual average GDP growth rate percentage in 1966 was 6.6%, with the first quarter growth at 8.48%, the second highest it's been since the Korean War. However, moving into the end of the year, fourth quarter measurements showed GDP rate cut in half, ending at 4.5%. And now, at the start of 1967, it has reached 2.93%. It has dropped to its lowest of the year in the second quarter, and since has rebounded, and it's slowly coming back. With this mid-year correction, I believe the economy will bounce back in 1968, and the GDP growth rate percentage will continue to grow and grow above and beyond the number it was at the beginning of 1966.
There you have it, wise words from an expert. It looks to be that we have much to expect for the future. Any final remarks?
No, I think that's all. Thanks for having me, Greg Washington.
Come on, it's not that hard to pronounce. Jorg Washing Machine. Jorg Washing. Sorry, anyways. We have one more guest joining us today, and that is Ibrahim Pinecone discussing the U.S. economy from 1968 to 1969.
Good to be here, Mr. Washing Machine. Now, 1968 was a considerably good year for the middle class, characterized by low gas prices and a low unemployment rate, among other things. While the average home price grew about 9%, it was complemented by a paycheck raise of about 8%. The GDP rose to an attractive $942.5 billion US dollars. As for 1969, we saw a mild recession in the later portion of the year, lasting 11 months into 1970. This marked the end of a very long economic expansion. This expansion was brought on by full employment and, in turn, deficit spending. The recession itself could be blamed mostly on heavy inflation. This forced the government to employ some very restrictive financial policies. The GDP from that year rose to $1.02 trillion. That's all from me.
The years of 1964 to 1969 were fantastic years for the U.S. We had good GDP per capita, and overall low unemployment rates. Everyone at this glorious news station is hoping to have fantastic years coming up in the 70s. We look forward to seeing you in the near future. Happy painting, and God